Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of our weekly Exploring the Parasha class with Rabbi Rebecca Schatz and Rabbi Matt Shapiro.
Parshat Vayigash. Unfortunately for everyone, we're actually picking up after the grand finale of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, which means there are not many show tunes I can sing for you today.
Do the last part of it.
And Jacob came to greet him. Oh, interesting. No longer feeling old.
Exactly.
That's a good segue.
And Joseph came to Egypt in his...
No, came to greet him. He's already in Egypt.
Oh, chariot of gold, your turn.
Of gold. Your turn.
Of gold.
I think what we've learned is that when Rabbi Schatz's camera is off, she's much more willing to do show tunes. Okay, moving forward, we're going to be picking up in...
Give me my...
All right. We're going to be picking up... Wait, when you turn your camera off, does that mean you're the distracted one?
No, well, yes, but you should continue.
Okay. We're picking up in chapter 47, post Joseph Megamix at the end of the musical. And so this is the denouement, right? Like this is sort of the aftermath of the story. Cliffhanger has been resolved. Everybody knows who everybody's brother is. Jacob has come down to Egypt with all of his crew, as they say. But so we're still left with some really interesting questions about, okay, this is a family that has been in turmoil for decades. What now? What's going to happen now? And so there is this interesting incident where Joseph has specifically told his brothers, don't tell Pharaoh that you're shepherds. And Pharaoh asks them, what do you guys do? And they say, we're shepherds. And so they go back and forth on that a little bit. We're not going to be diving into that sort of vignette of the denouement, but we are going to focus in on the next one. So I'm in chapter 47, and we're going to be focusing in on verses 10 through 12 is what we're focusing on this morning. So Pharaoh's met the brothers. Now Pharaoh's going to meet the dad. It's like meeting your in-laws, except not. So verse 7, Joseph then brings his father Jacob, presents him to Pharaoh, and Jacob greeted Pharaoh. Interesting here, just the one thing I'll point out in the Hebrew is that it says, Vayivarech Yaakov et Paro. So bank that, remember that. We're actually...
I thought we were doing 8 through 10.
We're doing 8 through 10, Rabbi Schatz. You really got to get it together over there.
Yeah, okay.
We're doing verses 8 through 10. Okay, so here we are. Verse 8. Vayomer Paro el Yaakov, Pharaoh, somewhat lacking social graces, says, Kama yemei shnei chayecha. How many are the days of the years of your life? I don't know much, but I'm pretty sure when you meet someone, that's generally not the first question you're supposed to ask them, but he's Pharaoh. He can do whatever he wants. Vayomer Yaakov el Paro, Yemei shnei chayai migurei shloshim umeat shana. Yaakov says back to Paro, the days of the years of my sojourning are 130. Me'at v'ra'im hayu yemei shnei chayai. Short and bad. Ra, translate them as few and hard. Not very long and pretty junky have been the days of the years of my life. Velo hisigu et yemei shnei chayai avotai. And indeed, they have not come up to the days of the years of the lives of my fathers, b'yemei megrehem, during their sojourning on this earth. I keep, by the way, translating that intentionally because I think it's a slightly funky phrase that keeps keeps getting used, right? That phrase, Yemei Shnei Chayai, right? Like the days of the years of your life. You could just say Shnei Chayecha, the years of your life. You could say Yemei Chayecha, the days of our lives, which would be not what the Torah is called. But it's a little bit of a funky phrase, which is why I keep translating it funkily. So there's that. He says, I'm 130 years old. It's been a rough ride, and I'm not even as old as my forefathers were. And that's it. End of conversation. Verse 10. Vayivarech Yaakov et Paro, vayetze milifnei Paro. So two interesting things here. So here in the JPS translation, it says Jacob bade Pharaoh farewell, but it says Vayivarech, right? Which again, I also called attention to in verse 7. He blessed him, right? That's the Pshat translation, that Yaakov blesses Pharaoh, which is a very interesting, I don't know why you allied that in a translation. It's a fascinating thing generally to me. Interesting that Jacob, who is for all intents and purposes just a random lowly Canaanite, is now blessing the most powerful guy in the entire land, right? That's interesting. Vayetze milifnei Pharaoh. And then he does a mic drop and he pieces out of the room, right? He doesn't ask for permission to go. Pharaoh doesn't say, okay, see you later. He blesses him and he goes. So I think that's interesting. I'll add sort of the gloss and a half of the mental health, spiritual growthiness thing that we occasionally focus in on here when we remember to. I think the construct of saying I'm 130 years old and I haven't lived that long is very interesting. It's interesting to think about what is the chronological duration of one's life as opposed to the way in which one perceives one's life, right? Time is relative. I will offer up, Sarah has been out of town this week, so I've been 1 on 3. And look, I'm even sentient, and I'm not bleeding or bruised from anywhere, so I'm doing great. Right? So the days feel very different than a standard week, right? Time is relative. We know this. And so I think it's interesting to introduce the general construct of what are you filling your days with? How do you make sure that you're not just counting the days, but making the days count, right? Like that kind of a construct. And in terms of, for us, when we think about our perception, not of time generally, but our perception of our lives, what's the perspective that we bring to that? When I worked at Beit Shuvah, I would talk about with people all the time about the fact that we can't change what's happened, but we can change the narrative that we have around what has happened, right? Whatever challenges and victories you've had in your life, right? The data is the data. The details are set, but I can tell very different stories about what's happened in my life depending on how I frame it and how I think about it, right? I could tell a story of, oh my God, this week's been so tough. I've had more to do than usual, and so on and so forth. Or I can say, there have been some really lovely pieces of this week. I feel good about how I've been able to take care of the kids. I've gotten some good time with them. It's been a blessing that Sarah's been able to spend time with her parents, right? Like the facts are the same, but the way that I frame the narrative can be very, very different. So I think in Yaakov's answer to Pharaoh, I think there's some really interesting stuff in terms of thinking about how we frame our experience and how we think about our lives. One little wrinkle that I don't know if it's actually grounded in anything textual, but I thought it was interesting. In terms of that Yemei Shnei Chayai that I sort of kept translating a little weird, Shanim can of course be years, and Shnei can also of course be 2. And Yaakov is certainly a person where there is doubling and mirroring and the light self and the shadow self and all that kind of stuff. And so I think it's interesting to wonder about, right, the years of both of my lives, right? He had his life as Jacob, and then he had his life as Israel. And so I sort of wonder, is there a linguistic wink in terms of what might be going on there? And yes, I will put it on the note that I've added to my phone. The Linguistic Winks would be a great name for a rock band. Okay, Rabbi Schatz is busy, and I said, I'm happy to take over. And she said, are you sure? And I said, yes, I think I am up to the task of asking for Kushiot. So here we go. We're going to see if I can do it.
Judging from a distance, though.
Well, some things are consistent. Are there any Kushiot? Renee?
So I was also thinking about the mental health piece of it. And when he talks about few and hard have been the years of his life, it's almost like an irony, because obviously he hasn't had a few years. He's lived quite a long life, Kanohara. And he focuses on reducing it, because I wonder if the hardness is what made him feel like his life wasn't very long, because it was so difficult.
Right.
And like you were saying, looking at the perspective, you can see the glass is half full or half empty, and he clearly sees his glass as not very full.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because of all the tsuras that he had.
Yeah. Yeah. So that the few and the hard are connected.
Much so.
That those two adjectives are intentionally put next to each other, because it feels like his life has been so difficult. It also feels like his life has been short, that it's like gone by too fast, even though there's a volume of years, right? Most of us don't make it to 130. But yeah.
And we only ask for 120, right?
That's true. That's true. All right. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks, Renee. Okay. Rebecca.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the sort of interaction between Jacob and Pharaoh.
Great.
So Jacob doesn't say this to Joseph or to a friend. He goes over, he meets the king, and he complains about his life. And then the king says nothing. And he walks out. He says goodbye and walks out. And I'm thinking, he's thinking, God, I just embarrassed myself. Why did I say that? But there's no explanation of why he chose to tell Pharaoh that he's had a rough life.
Right.
And it's kind of frustrating to say something like that to someone and then not get a reaction and no sympathy. You just say goodbye.
That's so interesting. So you're saying your sort of projection into what's happening in Jacob's mind is that he offers up this relatively vulnerable perspective to this really powerful guy who says nothing, and then he just sort of slinks out of the room and is feeling kind of embarrassed about it. Is that right?
Yeah, it probably comes from a place where I do overthink. You say something and then you go home and you're like, why did I say that? Did they understand what I said? I said the wrong thing, or did I say that? So that's my, when I read that sentence, I feel like, uncomfortable.
Yeah, I am also definitely someone who overthinks and then re-overthinks interactions well after they're over. I actually read the gap in response completely differently. I'm seeing like Jacob as like quintessential, stereotypical old Jewish man here. He like comes in and Pharaoh's like, how old are you? And he's like, how old am I? 130. And it's been no picnic. I gotta go take a nap. And he like leaves, right? Like that's sort of is that he doesn't care. It's like, Joseph's like, Dad, you gotta meet Pharaoh. Oi, do I have to meet Pharaoh? Yeah, Dad, you gotta meet Pharaoh. Oh, nice to meet you. How old are you? Oi, my back. Scene. That's kind of my picture of this. Maybe that indicates that I'm just very eager to reach old Jewish manhood, Kanahara, as Renee would say. But that's my take on it. I don't know if anyone else sees it that way. That's my take on it. Elon, what do you think? A crunchy old Jewish man? Give me some backup here. What do you think?
Yeah, being an cranky old Jewish man myself, I actually agree with your interpretation exactly. Pharaoh asked what's essentially a perfunctory question. How many years of your life? The impression I get is that we all have friends who or people we know who we say, how are you? And right. The right response is, fine, thank you. Yeah. But we know people who will then go, my precise, my this, my that. Like, no, dude, how are you is just perfunctory. Please don't answer me. So, like, Jacob I've never been a big Jacob fan. He just reiterates why not. He's whining for no reason. And what's even the complete lack of self-awareness is bad too, because to the extent that Jacob has had a rough go of it, and he hasn't had a completely rough go of it, but most of the stuff where he has a rough go of it are due to his actions. They're not due to things that other people did. For example, to the extent that he had a rough go with his brother and had to kind of run away from him for a bit, that's because he cheated the guy, right? To the extent that he lost his son Joseph for many years, that's because he favored him at the expense of all the other brothers. So it doesn't seem like he's taking any ownership of his own issues, and that's once again just. It doesn't seem like there's many impressive things that Jacob does. He's definitely the least favorite of, my least favorite of the forefathers.
Who's number one?
No, who's my favorite?
Yeah. Like, I'm curious what the Elon forefather ranking is. Like, what's the...
Well, if you say it's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I would probably rank them in that order.
Okay. All right. I think Isaac's underrated. Personally, I think Isaac had a rough go of it. I don't know if I'd put him higher than two. I think I will say, in defense of the cranky old Jewish man, which would be a great article for me to write. In defense of the cranky old Jewish man, I think he is a lot of his sorrow is self-inflicted. I think that's true, and he's had some rough beats, right? Like the wife switcheroo. And also, like, Rachel dies in childbirth, right? Like, he's had some sorrows, right? He definitely has. And to your point, there's been some good stuff too, right? Especially now, right? He's finally reunited with his beloved son, as problematic as that dynamic is. So if you would think, if at any point he would maybe be a bit more positive about what has unfolded over the course of his life. Like, you could trace there were some hills, some valleys, some bumps in the road, but at this point, thank God, I'm with my family. I'm reunited with Joseph. Things are going all right. And still really struggles to articulate that perspective. So I'm definitely with you on that. Yeah, Nancy, what are you seeing in here?
Well, I'm still interested in the question. I know you said Pharaoh can ask anything, which is true, but here Joseph is introducing his father, and then this is the question he asks, or this is what he says to him. So I don't know. It seems like there's something to it because it's so strange.
You're wondering why Pharaoh, why is that what Pharaoh leads with?
Right.
Great. I actually found I found a few comments on that with like completely with like a couple of different responses on that. So I'm happy to share those in a moment, which, by the way, still not I would lead with in a conversation with anyone. Oh, hey man, nice to meet you. How old are you? Nope, I wouldn't even I no shrinking violet. No, not to lead with that. Marlise and or Gary.
Yeah, my question was about Jacob blessing Pharaoh and whether or not that's just sort of a perfunctory or traditional type of thing that you would do to someone in authority, or any other meaning that you know about that.
Yeah, I'm really interested in that too. I'll be honest with you, I didn't find a ton on it. But I will say, just as a reflection on that question generally, I think given, and I referenced this when I was sort of reading through the verses, given the massive power differential between the two, it's fascinating to me that it's this way and not the other way around, right? When you think of a person offering a blessing, you generally think of it being the person who has more power, prestige, authority, agency in the interaction, right? Like parents bless their children, which conventionally is the parent, right? My kids don't tell me when to go to bed. I tell them when to go to bed. they don't listen, but I tell them when to go to bed. Right. So it's usually not the other way around. And so I do think there's a something there. I don't have enough to go on, but I'm also interested in that. And I'd be curious if other folks have thoughts on it too. Gary has a thought on it. Yeah.
I haven't done that. I mean, to me, it's not wrong to ask how old you are when you have an older person, because it's a sign of respect. And essentially, you're that, you don't say you're that old, but I'm saying, when you're looking at somebody who's elderly, sometimes there is a nice thing to say, I'm 96 years old or whatever it's going to be.
Uh-huh. Okay, interesting. So one for, hey, this is this might not be such a weird thing to do. One for like, hey, he's curious, right? I could see that. I still think it's a little funky, but I could see that. I will say, Marlise, I'm just like looking quickly as we're talking. Because I had been looking at it in verse 10 and I was really looking more closely at 8 through 10 and not through 7, though as I mentioned, like in 7:2, right? This is how Jacob greets Pharaoh. It seems like a lot of the commentators are saying like, this is just how people greeted each other, right? But I don't know if that's a rabbinic layer or if that's actually like the pshat, straightforward meaning of that, right? That I don't know much about, but yeah, I'm interested in it too. Yeah, Denise.
So I feel like, I wonder if this is one of those situations where the thing that doesn't make sense is where all the sense is. Because, so this is like Vayivarech Yaakov, as Paro, I think is what it says. And then the very next thing is Paro's like, how old are you? And he asks in a really weird way. But it's almost like Paro's also acknowledging, like, what are you doing? Why are you blessing me? And clearly you don't have as much power. Are you like 600 years old? Like, what is so special about you that you're blessing
interesting.
Me?
So you're seeing I like that. That hadn't occurred to me. I'll chew on that. You're reading verse 7 as sort of being a direct lead into what happens in verse 8. Jacob blesses really Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's like, man, why are you blessing me? How old are you anyway? Yeah. Interesting. At odds with the Mefarshim who I've just sort of quickly pulled up, but in interest, because, we do read Psukim, particularly narratively, as like leading into each other, right? So he blesses him, and Pharaoh says, why are you blessing me? How old are you? Right? That's sort of the subtext of why he's asking that. I just pulled up Radak, by the way, who goes in the opposite direction, but is still curious about it, because all these commentators, Rashi and Rashbam, are saying this is just what people did to kings, is that was the construct that they blessed them. Radak says this, right? He greeted him as is customary when one is introduced to a king. This custom is highlighted in Malachim. Yaakov blessed Pharaoh again upon leaving after the audience. Ini motzi ta'am lispor hazeh lama nichtav. I have not found a satisfactory explanation as to why the Torah would record something so ordinary. So not only am I confused and you're confused, but Radak is also confused. So if you're going to be confused with anyone, it's good to be confused with Radak. Okay, other thoughts and or confusions? Rebecca is also confused. Yes, Rebecca.
No, this is not confusing.
Oh, good.
I just opened up something, Rashbam, and I don't know if you're going to be talking about that later, if that's one of your sources.
No, just toss it on out there.
Well, if I understand correctly, what he's saying is that Jacob seemingly looked really old. He looked really bad. And that's why Paro asked him, how old are you?
Yeah.
In order to explain that he's not that old, he said, I'm just 130, but my life was really, really, really bad.
Yeah.
So that's...
Yeah. That was one of the two. There seemed to be two separate but equally important groups. There seem to be the Mefarshim who say, one, Pharaoh asked him, how old are you? Because he looked super duper old, and Pharaoh wasn't used to seeing people who looked that old, and Jacob sort of offers it up to say, and part of the reason I look so old is because of all this stuff that has happened, right? But then there are also some, and the commentator who said this most clearly that I saw was Rashbam, who said basically what he offers up is that the reason Jacob says this is because this has actually made him look even older than he is, right? He's like, I wouldn't look so old if all this stuff hadn't happened, right? They're sort of parallel to each other, but one of them is saying, I look really old because of because of all the stuff that's happened. The other saying, I actually only look this old because of all this stuff. I would look younger, except for all of the garbage that I've been through, and otherwise I'd look like a spring chicken at 1:30. I would be, on the cover of all sorts of, geriatric ad campaigns about how you can be living your best life at 1:30, were it not for all of the tsuris that has befallen me. So I don't know which one of those, if either, register with folks, but they're like sort of they're both explaining why Jacob makes a point to offer this up, but they're slightly different. So I don't know if folks like one or the other of those better, or neither. Neither. People don't like either. Yes, Rabbi Rebecca Bartholomew Schatz. Yes.
Hi. One of the things that I've always found fascinating about these verses is that we're so focused on ages that are so clearly made up. Like there's just no way that he was actually that old. So
you don't know that, Rabbi.
Okay, sure. But I do.
There.
That's true. I do think that there's something very interesting though about why the age was important for him to share. Right. There's a way of saying what he said without actually sharing a number. He could have said something along the lines of like, my life has been really tough and, this is how old I am. Or he could have said it in a way that I don't have the verse. Can you put the verses back up? Yeah. And that he could have said it in a more kind of straightforward way as opposed to the emphasis that I think is on, like the years of his life, right? The years of my sojourn, right? He's not even saying he's not even saying this is how old I am. He's just saying the years of my time on earth are 130. So does he feel 130? Has he actually been alive for 130 years? So I don't know. Because many people, I think I droshed on this a few years ago, like many people find this to be fascinating for all the reasons we're commenting right now. But the fact that it says few and hard have been the years of my life, he's both saying that he's really old and that he hasn't lived very long. So I think that those two things are really in conflict with one another. And so to focus on what do the numbers actually mean, or what is the actual focus of saying how old you are in this case, is really fascinating. So that's all.
Yeah. There's another piece to this that we haven't yet touched on that I think is really interesting. We haven't talked about the second half of verse 9 at all, and I think that there's something in that as well, is that there's a comparative piece here too, right? He's not just saying, I'm 130 and it's been short and tough. He's also making it comparative with those who have come before him, right? He's also saying, it's been short, it's been tough, and I haven't even gotten to the same lifespan as my fathers did. And I wonder about that because I think I think it's a challenge in life, I'll speak for myself, to live life non-comparatively, right? Where am I at my current age in terms of where other people are at in their careers? Where am I at in my age as compared to home ownership or family size or, car I drive, books and library, right? Whatever it is, right? Anything that might be out there. I think I'm in the lead for 37-year-olds with number of books, much to my wife's chagrin, but otherwise I don't know that I'm in the league leaders, but at least I've got that going for me. I made a commitment. I had made a commitment to myself that I wouldn't buy any more books before the end of the year. And then I was at Beverly Hills Library and the used bookstore was back open. Don't tell Sarah. I got 6 books for $10. How can you pass that up? We can't. It's impossible.
They'll never be able to notice because they'll just go in the many other piles of books in your house.
Thank you for enabling my issues, Rabbi Schatz. Anyway, there's a comparative piece here, right? And speaking for myself, and I think generally being in comparison is rarely a healthy thing. I think it's very rare to look at other people and see what they have, and then looking back at ourselves, and that helps us feel better about it. And even when even if you look at other people and say, oh man, they're in really bad shape. Oh, guess I'm in better shape compared to them. I don't think that's like a healthy way of feeling good about what we have either, right? I think there's a challenge in seeing what we have and saying, this is enough, right? Right? Who is truly rich, who is truly wealthy, the person who delights in what they have. That's really difficult. That's an incredibly difficult spiritual challenge, I think, just in life. And I wonder about how the fact that this verse is set up when Jacob says, few and hard have been the years of my life, and not even as long as my fathers have lived. I don't think it's an accident that that comparative piece is in there in terms of how he's thinking about the qualitative elements of what the content of his life has been to this point. I don't think that's an accident. When I like in the sort of addiction recovery world, there's this idea of comparing your insides to the outsides of others, right? That like I know how this feels to me, and then, I look at that person and they seem so happy, but that's not how I feel. Well, you actually have no idea how anyone else ever feels about anything. It's impossible, right? So the challenge of saying, okay, I'm going to focus on making the best of what I've got, and being in acceptance of the fact that it'll seem like some people have more, it'll seem like some people have less, and I'm going to do the best that I can in terms of my current situation. I think that's something to aspire to, and I think it's also something that's really, really, really difficult. And I kind of see, I don't know if that's what you get on the first read of this verse, but it's something that in looking at it a bit, it's something that I noticed. Renee, you've had your hand up for a while, but you have since left the computer to cook something else delicious. But now you're back. Yes. Hello, Renee.
I don't remember exactly what I was going to say, but I think it was that back to what you were talking about earlier, that there are certain sects that I know of. I don't know what the sects are, but I know that there are certain groups of people who do bless everyone that they come in contact with.
Yeah.
So maybe that's where he was coming from with his blessing of Pharaoh.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's going back a ways, but I wonder also if there's something in that, in kind of the inverse in what I'm pushing on a bit, right? To see that each one of us has the capacity to offer blessings.
Oh, that was my drash a few weeks ago.
Oh, I was definitely at Shul and was paying attention to it.
Yeah, great.
Mm-hmm.
I actually want to offer, based on what Renee just said, I think you're right, and I also think like Pharaoh did a lot of really amazing things for Joseph, right? We hear the word Pharaoh and we think negative because of the Moshe story, but if you actually think of this Pharaoh and Joseph's relationship, he was a really great guy, and he gave him a lot of opportunity, and he made his life really great. And I think that there's reason to bless, even if you leave a situation for something better, if you've had the blessing of whether it's working with a person or being mentored by someone or being raised by someone who's really made your life different, the fact that you are then leaving their side, you owe them blessing. And I think that's what he's doing here. I actually don't find it so surprising that he offers him a blessing, but I think to Alon's point, like he's not a saint himself, and he's recognizing that this person really made his life meaningful, and that's I find that to be very powerful.
Yeah, I get that. I still think it's funny to like stroll in. Here is your blessing. How old are you? I'm very old. Bye. Like that's still kind of a funny interaction.
Yeah. I think you're also reading it in 2021. Like I'm not sure.
That's true. I agree with that.
Yeah. I'm not sure that it would be the same if you read it.
And I certainly wouldn't be doing it over Zoom. Yes, Tybal.
two things. One, as you were saying, being an old crotchety woman that my kid for a very long time just calls an AK, an Altococker. I want to tell you what you have to look forward to as a book collector. I hit the point decades ago where I had to make a rule that's for myself that said if I had to read it first to know that I would want to read it again to allow myself to buy it.
Wow. That's a high standard to hold myself to.
I recently have to tell you, I could have gotten an Amazon gift card for something, but a choice was a book. So I took the book instead because I thought that wouldn't count and I knew I would want it. Anyway, why I raised him originally, because when you were talking about what your personal struggle is with envy, I just kept thinking that why that is for many people the toughest of the 10 in the Decalogue. Yeah. And the only one that's not, an action, it's a way of thinking, and why for many people it just really is a struggle.
Yeah.
To not even say, well, the grass always looks greener, but look at those people who are worse off, just to say, I'm not even going to look at that. Yeah. I mean, go to the Pirkei Avos, which I'll probably paraphrase incorrectly, which says, who is wealthy, the one who is happy with his or her lot, which is, it's just so hard not to make comparisons. Though, you lucky guy with books and a kid named Jonah.
Well, and lucky guy in so many ways. Like I am blessed beyond measure. Full stop. Thank God. And I still look around and I say, I want this and I want that, right? Like it is really challenging, Heibel, you put a finer and more discomforting point on it than it, right? I'm talking about wanting more and not feeling, like I have enough. You said envy, and yeah, that's true. It hurts to say that, but I think that is what it is, and that's uncomfortable, And I think it's grasping. I think it's insecurity. I think it's fear of not having enough. I think it's ego, right? I think it's wanting more. I think it's all of that. And to your point as well, like out of the 10, out of the Decalogue, the sense that this is the one, right? That this is the one that's not about an action or like a theological statement. This is the one that's about like in inner sort of psycho-emotional spiritual process, right? Don't covet. Like, well, no, people don't have coveting scorecards that they walk around with, although probably you can find one on Amazon. But that's something that's much more difficult to track. But sort of like we talk about this a lot when it comes to law, you're only ever legislating against something, right? Like if people didn't want to drive too fast on the highway, you wouldn't need to set a speed limit on the highway. The reason there are speed limits is because, well, otherwise people would drive too fast. The reason you have stop signs is because otherwise people wouldn't stop, right? You wouldn't need to say, don't covet or don't be envious unless it was something that was there, right? Unless it was something that was happening. And so then the invitation and the challenge is to navigate through that. Not easy. Yeah, Megan.
Oh, just going to riff on what you guys are saying about, I also think it's cultivated by the culture you live in. Like, speaking as maybe perhaps one of the younger people in this group.
I think objectively one of the younger. I don't think you can say maybe. I think we can say objective. Although it depends. Well, actually, define age, right? Few and hard have been the year, and he was. You
revealed your age today, and I'm the same age as you, so we're equal there. And I know Rabbi Schatz is younger than both of us.
Yeah, Rabbi Schatz is 12. That's right.
She's the youngest. So anyway, with our social media environment that is today, that's been cultivated, that envy, that want, that feeling that we can never have enough. And so I think there's a really big cultural element of that. And I don't know if that is worldwide. I think it's part of human nature too, but I think it can be either watered or, not given fuel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think the social media thing is definitely gasoline on a fire. There are now 2 Rabbi Schatz here. Lucky us. Look at that. We have 2 Rabbi Schatzes here. Oh my God. taking a picture of this. It is my lucky day. I have 2 Rabbi Schatzes in a class. Now that is enough. 2 Rabbi Schatzes. I do think the social media thing can be kind of gasoline on the fire, to be sure. Although I will also say, try as you might, you will not find me on social media at all. I'm not on there. Much to my, I think, emotional health. And Sarah's been on Facebook, and she's done with it. She just actually posted. She's like, I'm out. So I agree with that. And Megan, to your point as well, I do think part of it is also cultural. I think there are cultures and societies and countries that are much more communitarian than the U.S., as we have seen in any number of ways over the past year and a half, right? A sense of collective good is not something that our country necessarily has in spades. And I think when there is a very strongly individualistic ethos, I think that also sort of mashes that envy button pretty aggressively, which we then have a choice, right, about how we're going to respond to that. But I think that also ramps it up that much more. It's my sense of it. Yeah, Paula. Hi, Paula.
Hi. So I wanted to go back to something Rabbi Schatz had said about blessing, that we're all capable of giving blessings and receiving blessings. That I used to, our house on Friday night used to be open to anybody from the cross-country team that wanted to come for Shabbat dinner. And I blessed my kids on Friday night, and it was a really very powerful experience to say to kids who were not Jewish, do you want me to bless you? I bless my children. Do you want me to bless you? And every single kid said yes, much to my shock. Everyone said yes. And it was really very moving to bless these kids, with the traditional blessings. And I always add a blessing. So, and I think that for me right now, when someone is really challenging for me, I tend to do something that I learned in meditation, on Shabbat morning with related to the priestly blessings of may you feel peace, may you have ease, may you be complete. And I find if I give blessing to somebody like that, it just de-escalates me and my reaction to them. So I wonder what, if Jacob dealing with his stress of meeting Pharaoh, and also going back to something Rabbi Schatz said about, Pharaoh wasn't all evil in terms of, Joseph's family was allowed to settle and flourish and thrive. But I would not, up to a point, when people became enslaved, there's no benefit, nothing good to speak of about that, no blessing there whatsoever. But prior to that, I think it's hard to learn from people who are very challenging and difficult. And yet if you can change that, if you can, sort of adjust your perspective of, look how much I learned from this horrible human being in my life. Look what wonderful qualities I have now because I experienced that. And this is how I adjusted to it.
Although Paula, I will say to that, the Pharaoh who enslaves the Jews is a new Pharaoh. Right, we hear that in the first chapter of Shemot, right? So I think there might be something interesting in there as well as recognizing that people aren't just their titles, right? For example, you could have someone who's the president of the United States, and depending on who currently holds that office, feel radically different about that person, depending on the person who's in that office, hypothetically speaking, right? So it's that people aren't just their titles, right? People aren't just their honorifics, right? That you can have a pharaoh and you can have a pharaoh, and it might feel significantly easier to offer blessing to one of those pharaohs. I think that that's an interesting piece as well that sometimes can be tricky too. Yeah.
That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, Rebecca.
What you and Megan said about envy, I thought was really interesting because because the way you had brought it up, with what's happening today, with how we see other people, and I have a daughter who's 13, and so I'm very aware of what she sees on Instagram and how it affects her mood. But the interesting thing here to me was that he's envious of his father and his grandfather, and I can't wait for the day that she will envy something in me, because that is not where we're at. But I do remember that
you're at the first part of the Mark Twain quote. You'll get to the second, but
I think I'm on the bottom of the curve. So I think we start off. I remember my daughter actually being envious of things I had, wanting my shoes, wanting my freckles, all that, and then now not so much. And I'm wondering how that shift happens and where you have to be in your mind to be able to be envious of your parents. I don't feel that I'm there yet, really. So.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about the parents piece specifically. I mean, I love both my parents very much, and I'm grateful to have them in my life, and I'm grateful, the more people I meet, the more grateful I am for my parents, right? Like it's not a given at all that, as an adult, that I'll have loving relationship with both my parents, that they'll be still married, that they'll be, people who are loving grandparents. That's amazing. That's right. I don't know that I'd say there's necessarily something that I'm envious about with them specifically. But I will say that I think in general, the envy piece, at least in my experience, comes from insecurity and fear, right? And that can be targeted in any number, right? Then that can get sprayed in any number of different directions, right? And maybe at the end of his life, Jacob, even with, right, the reunion with Joseph, he's feeling that more strongly. I don't know. I don't know if that's something that he's been walking around with. I mean, Elon was referencing this earlier. Like, this is always a guy who's been in competition with others, right? Going back to his experience with his brother and then passing that on to his kids and all of the toxic ramifications of that. This will probably spoil this as a possibility for next week's class, right? But the fact that he blesses both of Joseph's sons at the same time, right? Rather than blessing first one, then the other, right? There's something to be said about how maybe that's a moment of tshuva, right? That he has finally learned that you don't bless first one, then the other, that blessing is offered equally. Which also then gets back to what we've been talking about with blessing as well. So I don't know. I don't know that piece specifically, but in terms of the Instagram piece, God, my oldest is 10, and I am not looking forward to navigating that social media piece with him. We're just gonna like go into like a cement bunker where there's like no technology allowed, because it's scary. It is scary. But particularly the studies that have been coming out, I'm sure, Rebecca, you've seen them, about the impact that social media has on teens, particularly on young women, is just scary stuff, man. Scary stuff.
Luck with the cement bunker. Doesn't work.
I don't know how to segue out of the cement bunker into a bow for this week. Maybe Rabbi Schatz does. Rabbi Schatz, do you have a bunker-related bow?
I don't, but I agree with Rebecca. Good luck with a cement bunker, especially with Jonah. I can't really imagine that working out well. So
it would have to be a very heavily padded bunker for any of my children.
Yeah.
I don't know that I have I think we floated around in some really interesting pieces today in terms of blessings and insecurity and envy and a sense of perspective on our lives. So I'm grateful for all of that. I guess maybe just the one little bow I'll offer up is I think that having a sense of being able to bless comes from a place of abundance and gratitude, as opposed to envy and comparison, which often do not. So as we enter into Shabbat, my hope for myself as I navigate the next, how many hours? 45 hours of parenting solo, and you guys who hopefully have slightly less maniacal weekends ahead, that we each manage to approach and see our lives from a place of a sense of gratitude and abundance, because it is there. I mean, even there and like couching that, like, I'm a lucky guy. I get to spend the next 2 days with my kids and hopefully enjoy the time with them and spend Shabbat with them. And Sarah gets to have that time with her parents. Like, those are blessings, right? Can see them as challenges, can see them as blessings. So I'll offer that up to all y'all, and also really to myself, to try to get myself into that time frame heading into Shabbat. One quick pitch from a Center for Spiritual Growth perspective. Meditation Plus, back on campus this week at Temple Beth Am. For those of y'all who have enjoyed that in the past, Rabbi Ruth Sohn will be bringing Meditation Plus back into 3 dimensions this week, which is very exciting. Rabbi Ruth is awesome and someone who I have learned a lot from over the years, and it's wonderful that we are slowly getting to a place where that can be happening in a more directly interactive way and not just through the screen. So that's a good thing. That's an exciting thing. And wherever you find blessing and abundance, I hope you find it over Shabbat. And thanks for showing up, folks. Shabbat Shalom. We'll see you soon.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.